need an introduction, I'll import Lou. Thank you so much for the award from the Hope Funds for Cancer Research. I quite honestly knew very little about this organization and have learned a lot in the last short while, and it is doing extremely important work, and I thought I would make a few remarks that lead to thinking about the importance of the work you've been doing. So I've been in cancer research for now some 50 years, having done the first experiments in 1970, and have trained hundreds of investigators in that time. And I know how important it is to have funds to support budding scientists, and I deeply appreciate what the Hope Funds have been able to accomplish. Having been in cancer research for this long, I thought I'd reflect a little bit on the changes that I've seen in the field. I actually began research about 9 years previous to my picking up a cancer-inducing viruses, so it's closer to 60 years of progress that I've seen close up. And in about 1961, I began to apply what were then the very rudimentary tenets of molecular biology to the study of human and mouse viruses. And it wouldn't have occurred to me to work on cancer research because it was a very primitive field in 1960, 61. But in 1970, having learned a lot about viruses over that decade, I saw the possibility of providing a deep understanding of cancer by focusing on viruses. Now, viruses are wonderful objects of study because they're very, very tiny. They can compress all of their genetic instructions into a minimally sized package. And I saw the opportunity to probe into a virus's behavior and thus investigate what became one of the most important questions in cancer research, and that is whether cancer was a genetic disease or a developmental problem. And the work that we did and the work of many other people showed that it was a genetic problem. And it set in motion the enormous expansion of understanding that's happened since then. And it's a little ironic that now that we're getting a much richer view of cancer, we see that it's also a developmental problem. And that's sort of in the nature of scientific discovery. You never disprove anything. In 1970, we simply did not know what caused any one cancer, what made cancer cells different from normal cells, why cancer cells move around the body and set up secondary areas of growth. And by the beginnings of this century, all of those questions appeared tractable. And today we have deep, although still imperfect, knowledge of how cancers happen and what makes cancer cells different from normal cells. And we're beginning even to understand how they set up secondary growths. 60 years is a lifetime in research, but it's just a moment in the time on Earth of our species. And I marvel at what people can accomplish when enough of them are highly trained and willing to devote themselves to understanding a problem that then becomes tractable by their activities. And so, what has really happened over these 50 years? I think it's fair to say that the biggest contribution has been the development of new tools. Every 5 years, there's a revolution in the way we do experiments. And new technology doesn't just happen. It takes people to find these new methods, people who understand the tools and who also understand the needs of the biological research community. And often these people are trained in other fields. They're trained in chemistry or physics or even in engineering. And they have to work in collaboration with those who understand the biology. So now we sequence genes, we understand signaling pathways, we can visualize killer cells attacking cancer cells, we understand how cancer-causing genes interact with tumor-suppressing genes, we're finding cancer's vulnerabilities, and particularly we're finding vulnerabilities to immune attack, and none of that was even imaginable 50 years ago. But what's most exciting is, of course, what's coming. Cancer remains a scourge, the second greatest killer of Americans. We see death rates beginning to fall, but still achingly slowly. And what the future holds, we fervently believe, is major reductions in deaths due to cancer. Some of that will be due to prevention, but that generally is out of reach still. It'll largely be treatments that make the difference. Treatments with pills, treatments with antibodies, targeting radiation. These are all the improvements of the methods that we have today. But now we're seeing gene therapies, boosters of immune attacks, ways of treating cancer that were only a dream a few years ago. And so I want to emphasize that all of this came about because of advances in what was an arcane field of study in 1960, molecular biology. And remember that the structure of genes was only elucidated by Watson and Crick in 1953, and then it took a couple of years before it sank into the research community. So in 1960, there were really only a few hundred people who understood what was about to happen because of having the structure of DNA. By 1975, that number had vastly increased. But most importantly, what happened then was what we call recombinant DNA technology, which allowed us to manipulate DNA. And I remember giving talks in which I said that the power of these new methods was going to make it possible to solve all the problems in biology. We haven't reached that point yet, but, and sometimes it even seems further off than when we started, but the progress that's been made with these new tools is nothing short of amazing. So in research laboratories today, new methods are allowing us to investigate the behavior of constellation of genes, not just single genes. We found ways to culture cells that reproduce whole organisms. We found the ability to change cells at will and with ultimate precision, one nucleotide at a time. Truly, nothing seems beyond our reach. Even the ultimate mystery of biology, the functioning of the brain and its creation of consciousness, are beginning to make some sense. And all our new tools and new understandings is brought to cancer, where it provides fundamental illumination and new types of therapies. And all of this has come about because of a chain of transmission of knowledge and ideas fueled by young minds being trained and nurtured in our research laboratories. And if that chain was ever broken, it would take generations to rebuild it. Hope Funds for Cancer Research are playing the important role of forging the connections over generations that keep the transmission smoothly operating, so that the wealth of knowledge created today becomes a platform for the future. I'm honored to be recognized as a part of that great chain of learning that extends back to the dawning of civilization and will continually extend forward into the future as we search the endless frontier to find cures for our ills and understanding of ourselves. Thank you.